David and Laval lived a life built on secrets, where desire blurred into danger and love slowly rotted into obsession that would end in murder. Mark Evans had always believed that his marriage to Lisa was strong enough to survive anything. They had met in their 20s, built careers, bought a house, and spent 10 years together without ever thinking about breaking apart. From the outside, they looked like the perfect suburban couple, but behind the calm smiles and polite greetings, something was quietly dying between them. The spark that had once made their marriage feel alive was fading. Nights became quieter, conversations shorter, and laughter rare. The thrill of being together had turned into routine, and routine turned into silence. Mark started noticing the absence of excitement first. Lisa was still beautiful, still kind, but the chemistry they once shared was gone. He tried to fix it in small ways, weekend trips, gifts, surprises, but nothing brought back that rush he used to feel. The marriage felt predictable, and predictability frightened him more than anything. He wanted something new, something forbidden that would remind him he was still alive. That need slowly became an obsession that began to poison his thoughts. It started one night when Mark was browsing the internet, scrolling through forums about relationships and intimacy. He came across a community of couples who experimented with sharing their partners to strengthen trust and renew passion. The idea shocked him at first, but curiosity made him read more. Story after story described how couples claimed to have found a new kind of connection through openness and shared experiences. Mark couldn't stop reading. The more he explored, the more the idea stuck in his head. It sounded dangerous but thrilling. It sounded like exactly what he was missing. He didn't bring it up to Lisa right away. For weeks, he thought about it alone, imagining how it might work, how it might make them closer again. He convinced himself that jealousy was just another form of passion, that seeing Lisa desired by someone else would reignite what they'd lost. Eventually, he couldn't keep it to himself anymore. One evening, after dinner, he suggested that they try something new, something that could bring excitement back into their marriage. Lisa's first reaction was disbelief. She thought it was just a joke or a passing fantasy, but when she saw the seriousness in his eyes, she realized he meant every word. The idea scared her, but at the same time she saw the desperation behind it. Their marriage had been slipping away, and part of her feared that if she said no, she would lose Mark emotionally forever. She hesitated for days, trying to process what it meant. It wasn't love she doubted, it was herself. Could she really share the most intimate part of her life with someone else just to save her marriage? Mark kept talking about it, carefully choosing his words, presenting it as something adventurous rather than reckless. He promised it would bring them closer. He told her it would just be an experiment. Finally, Lisa agreed, partly out of fear of losing him, partly out of curiosity she didn't fully understand. It was supposed to happen once, with strict boundaries, complete honesty, and total control. They both believed that as long as they were open about it, nothing bad could happen. They had no idea how wrong they were. The first step was finding the right person. Mark took the lead, joining a few online communities and posting discreetly. They wanted someone mature, respectful, and understanding of the boundaries. After several failed conversations and awkward online exchanges, they met someone who seemed perfect, a man named Ryan. He was charming, well-mannered, and confident without being pushy. He understood what they wanted and seemed to know exactly how to make them both comfortable. When Mark introduced Ryan to Lisa, he watched her reaction closely. She was polite but nervous, her voice calm yet uncertain. Ryan's easy confidence seemed to relax her, and Mark told himself that everything was under control. They decided to meet again, and after a few more encounters, they went through with it. It was supposed to be just one night, just one experience to bring back excitement. But that night would mark the beginning of the slow unraveling of everything they had built together. In the beginning, Mark thought it worked. He felt a strange mix of emotions: jealousy, pride, and fascination, but also an unexpected thrill. The fantasy was real now, and the adrenaline of it made him feel alive again. Lisa seemed happier too, more open and affectionate afterward. For a short time, it seemed like his plan had worked. He convinced himself that this new lifestyle was saving their marriage. But the excitement didn't last long. After the second encounter, something began to shift inside Mark. The scenes that once thrilled him started haunting him instead. Every time he looked at Lisa, he imagined Ryan's hands, Ryan's face, Ryan's voice. What was once a fantasy became an obsession that he couldn't escape. He began replaying every detail in his head, trying to understand what Lisa was thinking, what she was feeling, whether she had enjoyed it more than she admitted. Mark started keeping recordings of their encounters, just for himself, or so he claimed. He said it helped him process his feelings, but in reality he couldn't stop watching them. Night after night, he would replay the moments, analyzing them like evidence in a case he was building against his own wife. The more he watched, the more he convinced himself that Lisa was drifting away from him. The jealousy grew like a poison he couldn't control. Lisa began noticing changes in Mark's behavior. He became distant, moody, and unpredictable. Sometimes he was overly affectionate, almost apologetic. Other times he would ignore her completely. The excitement they had briefly shared vanished, replaced by tension that filled the house like thick smoke. Lisa started regretting everything. She wanted things to go back to how they were before, but she knew that wasn't possible anymore. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Mark's fantasy had turned into his greatest nightmare. The more he tried to control it, the more it controlled him. He couldn't sleep without thinking about it, couldn't look at Lisa without imagining betrayal. He had opened a door in his mind that refused to close, and behind it was something dark, something dangerous that he didn't recognize within himself. As weeks passed, Mark stopped seeing the situation as something they shared. Instead, he began to see it as something taken from him. He believed that Lisa had given Ryan a part of herself that he could never get back. That thought burned inside him like fire. What began as a desperate attempt to save his marriage had now become the slow destruction of it. By the end of that first month, Mark was no longer the same man. His laughter was gone, his warmth replaced by suspicion and silent rage. The fantasy that was supposed to heal them had awakened something else, an obsession so deep it began to twist his thoughts into something unrecognizable. Lisa didn't know it yet, but the experiment she had agreed to for love was already turning into something far more dangerous. The illusion of control was gone. Mark had created a game that he thought he could manage, but now the game was managing him. What started as curiosity had turned into possession. What began as love had started to decay into something darker, a feeling that would soon lead him down a path from which there was no return. Ryan Halley entered their lives quietly, as if fate had carefully selected him to test the fragile balance of their marriage. He was younger than Mark, confident in a way that came naturally to him. He had an ease about him that made people feel comfortable, and he knew exactly how to say the right things to put others at ease. To Lisa, he seemed kind and understanding, someone who respected the boundaries they had set. To Mark, he was just a name on a screen at first, a part of a plan he thought he could control. But once Ryan became real, once he stepped into their world, everything began to shift. From the first time they met in person, Mark noticed something he couldn't explain. Ryan had a way of drawing Lisa's attention, not forcefully, but naturally, as if he fit into her rhythm. Mark tried to ignore it, telling himself that he was imagining things. This was, after all, what he had wanted. He had invited Ryan in, set the rules, created the fantasy. But with every meeting, Mark began to sense that the boundaries he thought were unbreakable were slowly eroding. Lisa changed subtly at first. She smiled more often, dressed with a little more care, seemed livelier than she had in months. She was glowing again, and for a while, Mark told himself that this was proof his plan was working. But that glow wasn't for him. He noticed the way her phone would light up late at night, how she smiled while typing messages, how she turned her screen away just slightly when he walked by. He didn't ask questions because he was afraid of the answers. Ryan became a regular presence in their lives. At first, their meetings were planned and controlled, but soon they became more spontaneous. Mark told himself it didn't matter, but his thoughts began to darken. He started to wonder if Lisa was seeing Ryan without telling him. The idea tortured him. The man who had once convinced himself he could handle sharing his wife now couldn't stand the thought of her being with someone else. Mark began to change in ways that scared even him. He found himself checking Lisa's messages when she was asleep, scrolling through her social media and looking for signs of betrayal. The more he searched, the more he found things that fed his paranoia, subtle clues, hints of affection that could have meant nothing or everything. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The jealousy was constant, a pulse that grew louder with every day that passed. He started following Ryan. At first, it was harmless curiosity, just wanting to know where he lived, what kind of person he really was. But curiosity quickly turned into obsession. He would drive by Ryan's apartment at night, park a few streets away, and watch the lights through the windows. He took note of when Ryan left for work, when he came home, who visited him. He kept everything in a small notebook, hidden in his desk drawer. To anyone else, it would have looked like the ramblings of a paranoid man, but to Mark, it was evidence. Lisa, meanwhile, sensed that something was changing in her husband. He had grown distant, unpredictable, and quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. He stopped smiling and started avoiding her gaze. When he did look at her, his eyes were filled with suspicion. She tried to talk to him, to understand what was happening, but he brushed it off. He didn't want her to know how deep his jealousy had gone. Ryan noticed it too. He could feel the tension every time they met. The energy that had once been open and experimental now felt heavy, like something was about to snap. He suggested they take a break, that maybe they had gone too far. Lisa agreed, but Mark refused to hear it. He insisted everything was fine, that they could continue if they just trusted each other. But trust was already gone. The nights became unbearable for Mark. He couldn't sleep without imagining Lisa and Ryan together. He began replaying moments in his mind, twisting them into something darker. Every smile, every text, every secret glance turned into proof of betrayal. He was losing his grip, but he didn't see it that way. In his mind, he was uncovering the truth. He believed Lisa was falling in love with Ryan, that she wanted to replace him. His obsession began consuming every part of his life. He stopped focusing at work, started drinking late at night, and avoided friends. The only thing he could think about was Ryan, what he was doing, whether Lisa was thinking about him too. He began visiting Ryan's neighborhood more frequently, sitting in his car for hours just to see him leave or come home. He memorized his schedule, his habits, even the license plate on his car. He convinced himself that knowing everything about Ryan would help him regain control. Lisa's guilt grew heavier. She hadn't cheated in the way Mark imagined, but she couldn't deny that she had developed feelings she didn't understand. Ryan was kind and attentive, the opposite of the tense, angry man her husband had become. She tried to end it, to cut off contact with Ryan, but he didn't make it easy. Ryan seemed to enjoy the emotional hold he had over her. He sent her messages, compliments, and reminders of the connection they shared. Lisa tried to ignore them, but part of her missed the warmth she no longer found at home. Mark eventually discovered one of Ryan's messages on Lisa's phone. It wasn't explicit, but it was enough to confirm his worst fears. In that moment, something inside him broke. The fantasy he had created, the one he thought he could control, had turned against him completely. He could no longer see Ryan as just another man. He saw him as an intruder who had stolen everything that belonged to him. He started preparing for something, though even he didn't know exactly what. He stopped writing in his notebook and began keeping things in his head instead. He told himself that Ryan needed to be taught a lesson, that Lisa needed to see how deeply she had hurt him. Every thought became sharper, colder, more dangerous. Lisa noticed the growing tension but didn't know what to do. The man she once loved now felt like a stranger sharing her house. He spoke less, smiled never, and looked at her with eyes that no longer seemed human. The air between them was thick with unspoken fear. Mark's obsession had reached the point of no return. He wasn't just jealous anymore, he was consumed. The boundaries between love and hate, desire and destruction had dissolved completely. Ryan wasn't just part of his fantasy anymore. He was the target of something dark that had been building inside Mark for months. Mark began planning ways to confront him. He rehearsed what he would say, how he would make him understand that Lisa was his, not Ryan's. But beneath that imagined conversation was something much more dangerous, a hunger for revenge disguised as righteous anger. Every day that passed pushed him closer to the edge. He had created a world where love and control were the same thing, and now that control was slipping away. He couldn't stop it, and deep down he didn't want to. The man who once believed he could handle anything was now being devoured by the very fantasy he had created. What began as an experiment had turned into an emotional war. Mark wasn't fighting to save his marriage anymore. He was fighting to destroy the man who had entered it. Mark's world had begun to shrink. The only things that mattered now were Lisa and Ryan, and the twisted web connecting them. Everything else, his job, his friends, his family, had faded into background noise. The more he tried to focus on ordinary life, the harder it became. He was haunted by invisible images that played in his mind constantly, each one darker than the last. Every quiet moment was filled with visions of Lisa smiling at Ryan, whispering to him, touching him, choosing him. It didn't matter that he had no proof. His mind no longer cared about truth. It only cared about feeding the obsession that had taken control of him completely. He started planting small cameras around the house. They were hidden in places Lisa would never notice, behind picture frames, under shelves, even inside the smoke detector in their bedroom. At first, he told himself it was to make sure Lisa wasn't sneaking Ryan into their home, but soon it became something more. He wasn't just watching to catch her in the act. He was watching because he couldn't stop. Every time Lisa was alone, he studied her movements, her expressions, the way she looked at her phone. Every pause, every sigh became a clue to her guilt. At night, he sat in his office surrounded by flickering screens, replaying footage that showed nothing but stillness. Yet the emptiness never convinced him. He told himself she was hiding things better now, being more careful. He became obsessed with details, her tone of voice, the way she closed her phone, the time she spent in the shower. Everything became evidence of something he couldn't quite prove. One night, Mark followed her car after she said she was meeting a friend from work. He stayed a few cars behind, keeping his headlights dim. When she pulled into a coffee shop parking lot, his heart began to race. He parked across the street, watching from the shadows. Lisa walked inside alone, but within minutes, Ryan appeared. They sat together by the window, talking. There was nothing inappropriate, no touching, no sign of intimacy, but to Mark it was enough. The sight of them sitting together was unbearable. It felt like confirmation that his marriage was over, that the woman he loved was slipping away for good. When Lisa came home that night, Mark said nothing. He acted calm, quiet, even gentle. But inside, something cold was forming. It wasn't sadness anymore, it was anger. A slow, silent kind of anger that didn't explode but instead crept through his thoughts like poison. He stopped trying to fix things. He stopped trying to talk. He started planning instead. He went into the garage late at night, sitting in the dark for hours, staring at his tools. The silence there comforted him. It was the only place left where he could think clearly. He began imagining scenarios, how he could confront Ryan, what he could do to make him pay for everything. The thoughts came easily now, almost soothingly. He began to enjoy them. Meanwhile, Lisa sensed that something had changed in her husband. His silence had a new weight to it, something she couldn't quite read. He wasn't just distant anymore, he was unreadable. His eyes followed her everywhere she went, but not with love or longing. It felt more like surveillance. She felt watched even when he wasn't in the room. The air in the house had become heavy, tense, and suffocating. Lisa decided she needed to end everything with Ryan once and for all. She sent him a message explaining that she couldn't continue. It was over, and she wanted to focus on her marriage, no matter how broken it felt. Ryan didn't take it well. He sent more messages, trying to convince her that she didn't have to choose. He said Mark was the problem, that she deserved better. Lisa ignored them, hoping it would stop on its own. But it didn't. Ryan began calling late at night, leaving voicemails filled with apologies and pleas. Lisa deleted them before Mark could hear, but she underestimated how closely he was watching. One evening, Mark saw Ryan's name flash briefly on her phone screen. That single moment destroyed any remaining restraint he had left. He no longer cared about reason or forgiveness. He was convinced that Ryan was trying to steal his wife, and that the only way to stop it was to remove him from their lives completely. The next day, while Lisa was at work, Mark drove to Ryan's apartment. He parked a few blocks away and watched from his car for nearly 2 hours. Ryan eventually came out, locking his door and heading toward his car. Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he watched. He felt an almost electric energy running through him. Seeing Ryan alive, breathing, smiling, it made his anger burn hotter than ever. He imagined confronting him right there in the parking lot, imagined what it would feel like to finally let the rage out. But he didn't, not yet. He told himself that if he acted too soon, he might lose everything. He needed to be smart. He needed a plan. That night, Mark found one of Ryan's letters hidden in Lisa's drawer. It was short but personal, filled with words that confirmed every fear in Mark's mind. It talked about missing her, about wishing things were different, about the connection they shared. Mark read it over and over until the words blurred on the page. He felt dizzy, almost detached from his own body. The jealousy had reached a point beyond control. It was now something primal, something destructive. He started visiting the cabin. It was an old place outside the city that he and Lisa had used for weekend trips years ago, back when they were happy. It was isolated, surrounded by thick trees and far from anyone who might hear anything. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that made the world feel empty. Mark began cleaning it, fixing broken things, preparing it. He told himself he was just clearing his head, but deep down, he knew what he was doing. The cabin was becoming part of his plan. Lisa had no idea what he was up to. She thought he was spending more time at work or maybe trying to find space to think. She didn't ask too many questions because she was afraid of his answers. She just hoped that time apart would help calm him down. But time was not healing Mark. It was transforming him. Each day, his thoughts grew darker, sharper, and more violent. He could no longer imagine a future where Ryan existed. He told himself that this wasn't murder, it was justice. He believed he was protecting what was his, fixing what had been broken. He began to rationalize everything, convincing himself that once Ryan was gone, things would finally be normal again. He waited for the perfect moment, the perfect excuse. He wanted Ryan to agree to meet him willingly. That way, no one would suspect anything. He practiced what he would say, how calm he would sound, how convincing he could be. All he needed was the right opportunity, and then everything would fall into place. Late one evening, Mark finally sent Ryan a message from a new number. He introduced himself calmly, saying he wanted to talk man to end the tension, to make peace for everyone's sake. Ryan, thinking it was an attempt to resolve things, agreed. He didn't see the danger. He didn't hear the violence hidden beneath Mark's carefully chosen words. As Mark set his phone down, a chilling calm washed over him. For the first time in months, he felt at peace. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. In his mind, it wasn't a crime, it was closure. And soon, he believed, everything would finally be over. The night of the meeting arrived cold and silent, with a sky full of thick gray clouds that hid the stars. Mark had spent the entire day preparing for it, though he never admitted to himself what exactly he was preparing for. He told himself this would be a conversation, an ending, a way to take back control of his life. But deep inside, the truth was darker. He wasn't going to talk. He was going to finish what he had already decided long ago in the quiet corners of his mind. Every step of the day felt mechanical: getting dressed, checking his phone, packing the things he thought he might need. He moved through each task like someone watching himself from the outside, detached from what he was really about to do. The cabin stood in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees that blocked out the sound of the world. It had once been a place filled with laughter and wine and long summer nights. Now it felt haunted, stripped of warmth, waiting for something terrible to happen. Dust covered the furniture, and the air smelled of cold wood and silence. Mark had been there the day before, cleaning up, making sure everything was ready. He had left a few tools on the table, things that looked harmless but could quickly turn into weapons in the wrong hands. Ryan arrived just after sunset. The sound of his car pulling up outside cut through the quiet, echoing faintly between the trees. Mark stood at the window, watching the headlights approach, his heart steady but his mind on fire. For a brief second, he thought about leaving, just walking away and pretending this night never existed. But that moment passed as quickly as it came. The anger was too heavy now, too deeply rooted. He had spent months feeding it, and it demanded to be released. When Ryan stepped out of the car, he looked calm, unaware of what waited for him inside. He probably thought this was just another awkward talk between two men trying to fix a complicated mistake. Mark greeted him at the door, his voice steady, his expression unreadable. He invited him in, the same way he once invited him into his marriage. The cabin door closed, and the sound of the latch sliding into place was final, heavy, and certain. Inside, the fire in the small stove burned low, casting a dull orange glow across the room. The air was cold enough to make each breath visible. They stood across from each other, the silence stretching longer than either of them could stand. Mark's eyes didn't move. He studied Ryan's every gesture, the way he shifted his weight, the nervous half-smile, the hint of confusion in his face. For a brief moment, Ryan began to realize something wasn't right. Mark's words came slowly, measured, controlled. He talked about closure, about respect, about how this needed to end. But as he spoke, his tone grew sharper, his voice lower, and the tension in the room thickened like smoke. Ryan tried to explain himself, maybe to defend his intentions, but Mark wasn't listening anymore. The words meant nothing now. The only thing he could hear was the pounding in his own head, the voice that told him this man had taken everything. The moment that followed happened so fast that even Mark didn't fully remember how it began. 1 second, Ryan was standing near the table, his hands raised slightly in confusion, and the next, Mark had crossed the room. There was no shouting, no warning, just a sudden rush of movement and impact. Ryan fell back, hitting the ground hard. The sound of struggle filled the small cabin furniture, scraping, wood creaking, the dull thud of fists meeting flesh. Mark's anger, held in for months, erupted all at once. He couldn't stop. The rage he had buried under calm words and careful planning now exploded in silence. Ryan tried to fight back, but Mark was stronger, driven by something unnatural. The fire crackled quietly in the background as if mocking the chaos that unfolded. In a matter of minutes, it was over. The cabin returned to silence, broken only by the sound of Mark's heavy breathing. When he looked down and realized what he had done, there was no satisfaction. There was no sense of victory or relief, just emptiness. His hands trembled as he stared at the still body lying on the floor. For a long time he didn't move. The weight of it settled over him slowly, pressing down like a physical force. He had thought this would bring peace, but instead it felt like drowning. He moved mechanically as though guided by some other version of himself. He cleaned what he could, wiping away traces, dragging the body toward the back of the cabin. The ground outside was soft from recent rain, and he worked in silence, digging until his arms ached. The only sound was the rhythm of the shovel and the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. He buried the body under a patch of damp soil, covering it with leaves and branches, erasing every visible sign of what had happened. When he was done, he stood there for a long moment, staring at the disturbed earth, feeling nothing but exhaustion. Mark drove home before sunrise. The roads were empty, and the world was quiet. He tried to tell himself it was over now, that he could go back to normal, that Lisa would never know. But the silence in the car wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, filled with the memory of what he had just done. When he finally walked into the house, Lisa was still asleep. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her face in the dim light. She looked calm, untouched by the storm that had just passed. He told himself that he had done it for her, that he had saved their marriage. He whispered the lie over and over until he almost believed it. Over the next few days, Mark forced himself to act normal. He went to work, made coffee, answered calls. He smiled when he needed to, spoke when spoken to. But inside, the noise never stopped. Every sound made him flinch, the doorbell, the phone, the sound of footsteps outside. He jumped at his own reflection, half expecting to see blood on his hands. He told Lisa that Ryan had left the city, that he had decided to move on and never contact them again. She believed him, or at least she pretended to. Weeks passed and life seemed to resume its shape, but Mark was no longer part of it. He moved like a ghost through the days, barely speaking, barely sleeping. The nights were worse. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cabin, the flicker of firelight, the expression on Ryan's face before everything went dark. He began hearing things, branches snapping outside, whispers in the dark, faint knocking that never came from any door. Lisa noticed the change. She saw the way he avoided her, how his hands trembled, how he couldn't stand silence for too long. She thought he was struggling with guilt, maybe over their failed experiment, but she never imagined the truth. She tried to comfort him, but he only pushed her away. Every touch reminded him of why he had done it, and every reminder made the guilt burn deeper. One morning, while reading the news, Mark saw the headline that made his stomach turn. A hiker had gone missing near the old cabin area. Police were searching the woods. He tried to stay calm, convincing himself they would never find anything. But deep down, he knew it was only a matter of time. The forest could hide secrets for a while, but not forever. That night, he returned to the cabin one last time. He told Lisa he needed to clear his head again, and she didn't question it. When he got there, the air was colder, the silence heavier. He walked to the spot where he had buried Ryan, half expecting to see the ground disturbed. It looked the same, untouched. But as he stood there in the darkness, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing behind him. He turned quickly, but there was no one there, just the wind whispering through the trees. Still, the fear stayed with him. He realized then that it didn't matter whether the secret was discovered. The punishment had already begun. He would live with it every day, waking to the sound of his own guilt, haunted by the man he had buried and the life he had destroyed with his own hands. The police arrived at the quiet suburban home that had once hosted wild nights of pleasure. Now, the house was silent except for the faint sound of a dripping faucet and the echo of footsteps moving through blood-stained tiles. The living room was in chaos, broken glass on the floor, a torn curtain, and a shattered photo frame showing a smiling couple who once looked inseparable. It was David and Lava. What had started as a secret game between husband and wife had ended in a nightmare that no one could have predicted. The body of Lavra was found near the kitchen, her face pale and lifeless, a thin mark circling her neck like a cruel necklace. David sat beside her, covered in blood, staring blankly at the floor as if his mind had already left the world. The officers who arrested him said he didn't resist, didn't speak, didn't even cry. He simply whispered the same sentence over and over again, almost in a trance. She wasn't supposed to love them more. Investigators dug into the couple's past, and what they uncovered shocked even the most seasoned detectives. Their so-called open marriage had started as a way to bring excitement into their routine. David, who had always been confident and adventurous, had been the one to suggest sharing his wife. It was his idea of exploring boundaries, of making fantasies real. But what he didn't expect was that the fantasy would grow roots in his mind and turn into something darker, something he couldn't control. Lavra had changed after their first encounter with another couple. She had once been shy and reserved, but the new experiences gave her a sense of freedom she had never known. She started to feel alive in ways that David could no longer understand. The problem was, David wasn't ready for the emotional consequences. He could share her body, but not her heart. The moment he realized she was forming deeper attachments, his obsession began to build silently, feeding on jealousy and fear. Friends noticed the shift in David's behavior. He stopped going to work on time, ignored calls, and began following Laura's every move. He would check her phone, drive past her friends' houses, and stay up at night scrolling through photos of her smiling with other men. His fantasies had turned into torment. The more he tried to control her, the more distant she became. Lavra started spending nights away, telling him it was for space, but David believed she was with someone else. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her to another man, especially not in the game he had started. On the night of the murder, neighbors heard loud music and laughter. The couple had invited a man they both knew, someone Lavra had been close to recently. It was supposed to be another of their shared nights, but something went terribly wrong. Around midnight, the laughter stopped. There was the sound of breaking glass, a muffled scream, and then silence. The next morning, the neighbor's dog barked non-stop, drawing attention to the open front door. That's when the horror was discovered. The other man, identified as Mark, had vanished. The police later found his car abandoned miles away, his wallet and phone still inside. Some believed he fled out of fear, while others suspected David had done something to him before killing Lava, but with no trace of Mark's body. The truth remained hidden. During questioning, David's answers were fragmented. He claimed that Lavra had chosen Mark over him, that she wanted to leave, and that she had mocked him when he begged her to stay. His words didn't match the evidence. The police suspected a sudden outburst of rage, a moment when obsession replaced reason. In court, David appeared hollow, as if nothing was left inside him. The prosecutor described him as a man consumed by his own fantasy, one that had devoured everything he loved. They showed videos from the couple's phone recordings of their so-called adventures, proof of how their private games had escalated into a dangerous addiction. The jury watched in silence as the line between consent and control blurred until jealousy became deadly. When the verdict came, David showed no emotion. Life imprisonment. No parole. The judge called it a crime of obsession, something born not out of sudden anger, but from a long descent into emotional decay. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read, except for one chilling question that still lingered in everyone's mind. Had Mark really escaped, or was he part of the secret buried within that house? Months later, a group of hikers found a shallow grave deep in the woods about 10 miles from the couple's home. The remains were identified as Mark's. His body showed signs of struggle, but no one could determine when he had been killed. That discovery confirmed what investigators feared all along. David's obsession hadn't just cost one life. He had planned this long before the night Lavra died. It wasn't just jealousy. It was a complete unraveling of a man's mind, one who could not live with what he had created. The story of David and Lavra became a national sensation. News channels called it the fantasy that killed love. Psychologists debated the dangers of emotional boundaries, and true crime enthusiasts dissected every detail of the case. Some believed David was a monster. Others saw him as a victim of his own fantasies. But everyone agreed on one thing: what started as a harmless game had turned into something terrifying. Years later, the house was sold to another family, though neighbors whispered that strange things still happened there. Some claimed they heard footsteps late at night or saw lights flicker in the living room. Others said they could feel an eerie presence in the backyard near the old oak tree, where detectives once searched for evidence. Whatever the truth, the story left a lasting scar on the neighborhood, warning about how desire can twist into destruction when boundaries vanish. In his final prison interview, David said something that haunted those who heard it. He said he never meant to kill Lavra, he just wanted her to stay his forever. But in trying to own her completely, he lost everything. His words became the closing line of documentaries and podcasts that followed the case. They served as a grim reminder that even the most passionate love can become a deadly obsession when fantasy turns to control, and control turns to murder.